gosh. All right, guys, this is the story of Bullwinkle, the smartest deer that I've ever encountered. He's either the smartest or he's second that I've ever encountered in my entire time deer hunting. And if you guys listen to our podcast or anything, yes, you've probably seen a clip of me saying that some deer are stupid. And I will stand by that. I do believe that some deer are stupid and they just aren't that smart and they live in the right place, that they do make it to 5 or they make it to 6 years old. But there is other deer that I will say that I do think are incredibly smart. Bullwinkle was incredibly smart. I've never seen a deer that was so calculated in what he was doing, and it took me forever to figure out what he was doing. So it started out all the way back in 2015. In 2015, we just got this new farm. We got pictures of him in velvet, just 2 pictures. And he was a really good deer. He looked really similar to this, just not quite as big, and he was super heavy. A friend of ours was hunting the farm with us, and he kept describing this deer with this ridiculous mass. He just said he looked like a moose. So hence the name Bullwinkle. So that started all the way back in 2015. So after that season, we had a few pictures of him on the property throughout the year, but really probably no more than 5 or 6 photos. It seemed as though he would just kind of pass through. He wasn't there that often. So 2016 rolls around. No summer pictures of him, no velvet pictures, no hardhorn pictures until actually it was like October 31st and through November 2nd. We had 3 photos of him, those 3 days in a row on one part of the farm. And then that was it. That was all of the pictures that we had for the entire year. No summer photos, no photos after that. That was the only photos that we got of him. So really, we weren't even really hunting him, honestly, because it just seemed as though this deer didn't live here. He wasn't a local buck. He wasn't a resident buck. He would come through maybe during the rut or every once in a while. We knew he was around, but the thought of actually seeming to get a chance at killing him seemed like it wasn't even worth the time to pursue him. Although I loved him because I'm a mass freak. The deer that have just crazy big mass is the deer that really, they get my heart going. Those are the ones that I love those bucks. I really couldn't care if they didn't have tines over 5 inches. If they got stupid mass, I'm all about them. So 2016 shed season comes around and we go and we're looking for sheds. We're trying to find antlers, and the best day I've ever had shed hunting, we found 10 antlers. I guess I should say the best day I've ever had shed hunting size-wise. We found 10 antlers and 2 just slammers. One is the other deer that I will claim that is probably, if he's not smarter than Bullwinkle, he was equally as smart, the smartest deer that I've ever encountered. And then the other one was this deer, which is Bullwinkle. When we pulled out in that field, I could see an antler laying out in the middle of this alfalfa field. And I was like, whatever antler that is, it's freaking big. And I could not believe it when we drove the 4-wheeler up and his antler was laying there just like this. My jaw about hit the floor. To this day, it's one of my favorite antlers ever. Just ridiculous mass. You can see he had an inline tine here, or a kicker off that G3 that was about like that. And I've been trying to find an 80-inch antler forever, and this one would have broke 80 if he hadn't broke that. So that one really chaps me. But so here we hadn't seen this deer all year other than the 3 photos during the rut. And then we find his antler and had a picture of him going into the timber with 1 antler. So I see this picture and I'm like, and of course I looked for the other side. But then after that picture, I've always heard the theory that, a really heavy antler, the other side won't be very far because it lopsides their head. Well, this antler's freaking heavy. And I'm telling you what, after I had that picture, I was like, it's gotta be here. And the other side was bigger. So I knew that one was over 80. And I went through everything. I uncovered every thorn, every tree, every possible thing that I could, and could not find his antler. So I have no idea where he dropped it. I don't know what happened to it, but I have a hard time believing the theory from this day that really big bucks or really heavy antlers, that they'll drop them right next to the other one, because I have another antler that I found that's extremely large, and same thing. 2017 was really no different. No bullwinkle all summer, no bullwinkle early October, no bullwinkle really until the same thing. It was like November 1st or 2nd, and then all of a sudden we got a picture of him. And actually, the same day that we got the photo, my dad and my brother happened to be in the same stand right next to that camera. It was on a little bit of a trail and a small scrape that these deer had started. It was either late October or the very first few days of November. I'd have to go back and look, but they saw him. They saw him and another deer that was in the 170 range, both in the same morning that we got the picture of him. So couldn't believe that they actually saw him. They couldn't believe that they saw him. They made it, Easton was really young at the time, so they made it to like 10 a.m. and Easton decided he had to go get McDonald's. Could not wait, had to go get McDonald's, and Dad was trying to get him to sit all day. Anyways, they decided they were gonna go get McDonald's, and then they were gonna go back to the same stand. When they went back in the same stand, they bumped him. They don't know if they bumped him, but they bumped deer, and they're assuming that he was one of them just with where he went. So I actually ended up going and hunting that same spot 2 days later, I believe, and I saw him as well. From the same stand, came from the same place, but he went, there's two huge trails that would split basically. So one came right to us, and then the other one went up the hill. Of course, he took the one that was up the hill. But I mean, this year, 2017 was his biggest year by far. Huge deer in the mid 80s, 186 to, I think he was actually 188. And the reason I know that is because we actually discovered that somebody has his set from that year. So after that sighting, no more, so there was a 3-day window, no more pictures of bullwinkle, no sightings of bullwinkle, just off the map, gone. No idea where he went, no idea where he'd gone. We had figured that he probably was just, after he felt that pressure, that he left completely. So I don't know if that's the case or not, but regardless, we couldn't find him. So shed season rolls around, trying to do everything I can to find his sheds, obviously can't find them. Then now, you know, coming back full circle, now I know that somebody else had already found his sheds. And so now we go into 2018, and for the first time ever, we actually did get summer photos of him. I don't know what changed that year. I don't know why he all of a sudden was around, but we got summer photos of him. And this was from that year, and his mass was incredible. And as we'll show you on these velvet photos, for whatever reason, his bases, like the velvet had grown almost to the point that was over his eyes. And his left side, of course, I can get the small side, but I can't get the big side. So his right side was significantly bigger than this side. Extremely heavy, but we were wondering, you know, is he gonna keep that? I mean, it would have been like a 8, 9 inch base, probably more than that. It would have probably been 10, 11 inches if that had solidified into antler, but it didn't. It cleaned off, but I have no idea why. I don't know what caused that. I'm not sure why he did that. So anyways, going into the season, when we were shed hunting, we were just shed hunting the whole farm, and there was a particular spot that just tons of traffic. You know, lots of deer were going through there. It was a pretty good funnel, and I felt like we were missing some deer there. So I told Dad, I was like, you know, let's hang a stand here. I think that, and the good thing about it too is that we could hunt it with a different wind than what we could hunt a lot of our other sets. So we hang that stand. So going into deer season, bullwinkle had stayed fairly consistent. We had a few sets of pictures of him, but he wasn't all over the place, and I had no idea what he was going to do when he actually shedded his velvet. Well, long story short, once he shed his velvet, we couldn't find him again. He was just gone, and it had no idea where he'd gone to. And so I figured, you know, he's probably going to be gone, and maybe he'll show up on that one camera again in the last few days, and we'll sit there and try and kill him. And so then too, at this point now, we knew that he was probably at least 6, 7 years old, because he was starting to go downhill and just getting really crazy, throwing lots of junk. So anyways, the season rolls around, we start hunting. It was early October, probably, I don't know, maybe the 15th or something like that. And we had a wind where we couldn't hunt a lot of our other sets. So we decided, you know what, let's go hunt this new set, see if we see any deer there. we hunted it and we had a really good sit. We saw quite a few deer. We heard some bucks fighting around us. I think we saw even 1 or 2 decent bucks. And so all of a sudden that spot was a little bit more on our radar. Well, it was a few days later. I'd have to look, we'll see, and it was early October, and we're sitting in that same stand because we have that same wind, and we'd seen a couple deer. We can hear a deer across from us on the ridge as it's starting to get dark. And my cameraman says, hey, there's like a 130, 140 inch deer behind you. And so I turn around and I look, and then I was like, dude, that ain't a 130 or a 140, it's freaking Bullwinkle. And is what he was seeing is Bullwinkle's frame is not, he doesn't have a huge frame, so he was just kind of throwing a number out there. But my jaw hits the floor. Like I cannot believe it. I am actually seeing Bullwinkle in the flesh. The second time I'd laid eyes on him in 5 years of hunting him, and he is huge, just giant. He comes right down the draw, and he goes and he works a scrape that I had no idea it was there. He hits this scrape really hard, and you know, certain deer, I believe, when you get close to their core area, they just have a behavior and a demeanor to them that's a little bit different. They're more relaxed and they don't seem as on edge as they may be when they're adventuring a little bit. And to me, it just seemed as though I was like, this, I think, is his spot. This is where Bullwinkle's living, because he just seems to be super chill here. He doesn't seem to be really nervous, and he seems to understand what's going on, and he's working a scrape and he's just doing his thing. And it was still 10, 15 minutes before even sunset. So it was fairly early when we got to see him. But at the same time, my heart was broken because I'm watching him hit the scrape, and I know I'm not going to get a shot because he hits the scrape and then he goes on to the food source to the west. So I did have a camera though, and I went and I put a camera down there, and it was early in October. So I knew, I was like, man, we have a chance at killing this deer because he's going to hit that scrape again, and he'll do it during daytime at some point because it wasn't too far from a bedding area, not one of those scrapes on the edge of a food source or something where he'd have to, where you're really fighting time. I knew if we had the right conditions and the right day, the chances of us catching him at that scrape was really good. So we put this camera on there. Well, basically for the next 10 days, I can't get a wind to hunt him. And I'm going nuts because I know this is my window to kill him on a scrape. Right now is when I need to be hunting him, and this is when my window is to be able to kill him on this scrape. So I had another stand that I've been hunting because it basically, the back end of it is it's a really big, really steep hill, kind of a cliff. So I could hunt it day in and day out, and these deer just never busted us because as long as I got in early enough, the way the stand was situated in the terrain, they couldn't get around us, they couldn't get downwind. And so I sat it, I don't know, probably 10 or 15 times before I killed my deer. And the reason I kept sitting it is because we were seeing 30, 40 deer a sit in the timber, and it was just perfect. And I just knew it was a matter of time before a big deer was going to come by. So I did end up killing a really good deer from that stand, but never saw Bullwinkle out of it, never had a hint of him. Well, end of season comes around, go and pull the card, and he'd been at that scrape. We'll have to count it for you guys in this video, but I bet you it was probably at least 3 or 4 times during the daylight. Sometimes he was there twice a day, in the morning and in the afternoon. That hurt, you know, and I think if I'd have trusted my gut, even once, the problem with the stand was it wasn't one of those stands where you were gonna go and you were gonna get to see a lot of action, but if I would have just been persistent and kept sitting that stand, I do think I would have got an opportunity at him at some point. But I get a little short attention span sometimes, so I like seeing deer, and especially when they're rutting and stuff. So I kept going to this other spot. So shed season rolls around. Easton and I drive back there. Actually, late season comes around, and Easton was going to go and just try to kill a doe. He just needed some meat. So he calls me. He's like, hey, do you have any idea on somewhere I could go sit on the ground? I don't know where I can sit on the ground and try and kill a deer. And I said, yeah, I know where you should go sit on the ground. Go sit on the ground right in this spot, and I'll show you guys. It's like right at a corner, like a crossing of a few drainages that has food sources all around it. And so Easton goes and he sits there, and I don't know, it's probably 45 minutes later or an hour later, I get a phone call, and Easton's telling me, he's like, I see Bullwinkle, I see Bullwinkle. And I'm like, what? And he's like, yes, I see him. And I was like, well, get off the phone. Don't bust him. And so anyways, Easton calls me, or we talked later that night, and Bullwinkle was bedded directly across from Easton. and Easton watched him bed right there. And I couldn't believe where he was bedded, because what that meant to me was this, I was starting to think, okay, I think Bullwinkle may have had me patterned, because where he was bedded made great sense for him to be able to get to where he was making the scrape, and where I felt as though I had a good chance of killing him in that drainage. But at the same time, he was able to see our access point. There's only one access point to that portion of the farm, and it was right where he was. So there's no way for me to be able to get to the back of the farm without going through that spot. And I was starting to question myself and say, can a deer be that smart? Can he be that intentional that he's bedding in this particular spot to make sure that he knows whether or not we're in the certain portion of the farm? So I was still trying to grasp that thought. Anyways, East and I go to pull some cameras. We're on a four-wheeler, and the stand that I'd been hunting a whole bunch, that I'd killed my deer out of that year, here comes Bullwinkle booking out of the timber, and East and I almost hit him on the four-wheeler right under this stand. And so now I'm like, what the heck? How I sat there so many times, and I know that all these other deer weren't busting me, and here he is. He's right there. It's almost like he had to have deliberately known if I was back there or not. But that was just one instance. So I was like, maybe it was just a random coincidence, and late season he's moving because of food or something. I don't know why. Well, a few weeks later, shed season comes around, and we go and we start looking for sheds. And when you know it, we find his left side right behind that stand, within 70 yards of that same stand that I'd been sitting 15 times that year and killed my deer out of. Same thing, of course, I can't find his right side, which is the big side. I can only find their left sides, but I won't complain too much because it's a pretty wicked antler. His beam now is only like 19 inches or something like that, but his mass, as you can see, is just ungodly. It's just ridiculous. So now, though, I felt as though this deer knew for a fact I was going to that stand. And the only way that he could have known that is he had to have been bedding in that position where Easton had seen him. And so I decided, okay, you know what? Going into the 2019 season, if Bullwinkle's still around, because this deer we've been hunting him since 2015. So he's old as dirt at this point, because we believed in 2015 he was already mature. So I'm hoping he's still going to be alive, and that he's still going to be somewhat of a resemblance of his old self, so that he's not, not that I wouldn't shoot him, but it'd be cool for him to still have the mass and be the monarch that he was. Well, the season rolls around, and sure enough, we get a couple summer pictures of him. Same thing, only a few summer photos, and now he's in a different spot. But I said, okay, he's there, and he's a good deer. He's definitely gone downhill significantly. I think the year prior he was probably still in the 180 range, and now he was probably, he ended up being 172, but he was still a super cool deer, had all kinds of character. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna try and kill Bullwinkle this year, but I'm gonna give him the credit that he deserves. So what I decided was that I was gonna take my theory that he was extremely smart, and that he was bedding in this one particular spot to be able to see if we were accessing that farm or not. And so he would know if I was in there or not. So what I decided I was gonna do is I was gonna use the same place that I'd seen him hit that scrape the year prior, and that I was going to try to kill him. I was gonna put a camera in there, and then all I needed was one picture. I didn't care if it was daytime, nighttime, I didn't care when it was. If I had one picture of Bullwinkle on that camera, then I knew he had moved to his fall range, or he was in that area and he'd be doing it again. And then from that point on, as long as I had the perfect wind, I was going to hunt that stand every single day until I got a shot at him, or at least saw him or had something. I was going to exhaust all efforts. If it took almost all season out, that's what I was going to do. I just knew that spot, it may not be the most exciting hunts all the time, but I knew if I just kept sitting in that same spot, he was going to come to that scrape at some point, or he was going to come through there. I was hoping, this is October still, so I was hoping that he was going to come to that scrape and I would get a shot at him. Other than that, then I was going to hope during the rut that I was just close enough to his core area that I would catch him at some point. So perfect winds, I was going to sit there. But as we'll show you guys on this map, I also decided I'm going to change my access point, because he knows I said, you know, if I'm going to give him the credit that he ended up deserving, then he knows when I'm here and he knows when I'm not here. And the way he knows is because of where he's betting. So I'm going to access this stand from a point that there's no way that he can know that. That way he won't have an idea if I'm in there or if I'm not, and he should feel comfortable coming into that scrape and giving me a shot, hopefully. That was the plan. So I started parking way, way farther away and making ourselves go on this. We would cut one direction for several hundred yards, and then we would go straight to this stand where I felt as though we were basically the furthest away from him being able to see us access it from where I thought that he was betting. And then it was probably, I don't know, maybe the second or third day of sitting that stand. We'd sat there a couple times and had seen some does and a few little bucks, but no bullwinkle. And so I just kept sitting there. I think I only had to sit there 3 or 4 times. We're sitting there. It was a super, super windy day, like 30, 40 mile an hour winds, but this is a really good secluded bottom that protects you really well. So last 20 minutes of light, 30 minutes, the wind dies down completely, and there's almost no wind. The deer start moving. We hear 2 bucks fighting. Me and my buddy Dakin, we hear 2 bucks just going at it, and neither one of us said it, but you know when you can hear the difference in 2 bucks fighting. You know, it was just super dense antlers, just like 2 baseball bats. Just and so in my mind, one of those deer was Bullwinkle, and in his mind, it was the same thing. But you know, as deer hunters, we can be a bit superstitious. So I wasn't going to say anything because I was like, man, if I say something, then he's not going to come in. So you can't say that, you know, you're going to jinx yourself. So anyways, a few minutes go by, and then I can hear a deer walking. It's super quiet. Thank God that the wind had died completely, and our thermals were pulling our wind down. So it wasn't actually blowing down to him, which is what the wind direction was supposed to be, because I was banking on him coming from across from me. Well, he didn't. He came just to the right of me, which would have been not good for the wind that we had. And so fortunately, our thermals are pulling it down right into this bottom, so he's got no idea that we're there wind-wise. And so I hear this, and my heart starts thumping because it's coming from the same direction we hear these bucks fighting. And I look up and I see him. He's already at 40, 50 yards. And I tell Dakin, I said, Bullwinkle. And instantly my heart is just going insane because here he is, he's 40 yards and he's looking around and he's walking right at us. He's on a trail that is going to come right underneath the stand. My heart was just going insane. I'm doing everything I can to control my emotions. And he starts coming and he's walking right at us. And sure enough, he walks right underneath us, and he gets to the point where I'm looking at him through the platform on the stand, and my freaking heart's in my throat because I got my feet situated to be able to shoot him to the left. I wasn't comfortable with where he was, and I knew it was going to have to take a little bit because it was so steep. I'd put that stand probably 25 feet up or so to be able to shoot across this little drainage to the scrape. So I had to move it up quite a bit higher to be out of the line of sight of the deer. Well, now when he's right underneath me, this angle is so steep that I'm not comfortable with it. I couldn't shoot him anyways, but I had my feet situated for him to continue to come out on this trail and walk out on this trail where I'd have a shot at him. Well, of course, for whatever reason, he decides he's going to turn back around. So keep in mind, the wind has died. It is, whisper quiet, and I have an 8.5-year-old deer at 0 yards, and now I have to try to move my feet. So he turns around and he walks up the hill 6-7 yards. So now I have this deer now he's up a little bit higher, so he's going to be a little easier for him to see us, and he's right here. He's less than 10 yards, and my feet are set in a way where I can't shoot. So now I'm trying to move my feet and get myself turned enough to be able to draw my bow and shoot this deer that to me was a deer of a lifetime at 6 yards with absolutely no wind and not get busted. So I'm just praying to God that please don't let this stand creak. Please don't let this stand creak. And anyways, I managed to get completely turned around, and I took a deep breath because I was totally losing my lunch at this point, and I came to full draw. And I let the arrow go, and I hit him pretty much perfect. But you know, on a deer like that you've been chasing for 5 years, I've only seen him in person twice in my entire life. I guess 3 times if you count the 4-wheeler encounter. It was the pinnacle of deer hunting for me, because what I thought was going on and how smart he was all came to fruition in that one moment. So I did everything I could to hold my emotions so that I wouldn't be crushed if he wasn't laying 80 yards away. But I mean, the whole time my gut is just, you know that feeling. It's just turning, and I could not wait. And we get down, instantly I see lung blood, and I feel so much better, and we start tracking, and then I see him. And from there, it was, for me, the most significant deer that I've ever killed. And I also, probably the most respect. I respect every animal that I kill. I respect all of them, but at the same time, the respect I had for Bullwinkle, because of how smart he was incredible. Putting my hands on him, it was like something I can't even describe. It was the only deer that I've ever killed where when I picked him up, that it literally felt as though it was a dream. Like, I did not think that it was hard to conceptualize that this is actually real. I'm actually picking this deer up. When I walked up on him, his body is just huge. He's got this giant forehead and big noggin. It's all scarred up. He ended up being 8.5 years old. Just an absolute tank, and a super smart deer. So that was a pinnacle so far of my deer hunting career, I guess, if you want to call it that. That's the story of Bullwinkle.